My name is Ann Rolling, and I work with Children's Hospital of Wisconsin and within their community services programs. My current kind of location is within our Milwaukee office, but I've also worked in Racine, Kenosha, Burlington, kind of all in that southeast region of the state. So in a way, it's kind of nice to be back in a smaller community and kind of reconnect with a county that isn't necessarily privatized and all this stuff as the now the Division of Child Protective, whatever it is now, is. So, but my training is within clinical psychology. So I started my work as a therapist, and then eventually became kind of a manager within the Racine team, and then eventually transferred up to Milwaukee. So currently I oversee a team of 11 therapists, and we have a couple of consulting psychiatrists, a couple of consulting psychologists who do some testing for us. And then, the rest of the office is probably, there's a variety of other programs, but you have about 200 or so family case managers working within the child welfare team. And so definitely can kind of relate to a lot of the experiences going on there. So, but I guess I'd like to kind of check in with you guys to see, if you guys want to just do a quick show of hands, kind of what sort of background you're coming in with. So, are there folks here who work in child welfare within this area? Doing any ongoing case management or child protective services? Child advocacy, law enforcement, what kind of roles do you guys have in your positions?
Aging and disability resources.
Oh, okay, great.
Mental health provider.
Mental health provider, okay.
I'm a foster mom.
Oh, foster parent, great. So a whole variety, yeah.
Versatile, in your own life, everything.
Gotcha, okay. So quite a good variety of people with different backgrounds. So I picked this title, I Feel Your Pain, because that's really what trauma-informed care is about, is the fact that we're working with people who are experiencing some sort of pain. It may be a very recent pain of the trauma they experienced, or it could be something that's chronic or way back in time to their early childhood. And it's still not something that they've been able to master. I also kind of chose it a little tongue-in-cheek because of the political stuff going on. And this, I'm not sure if anybody recognizes the quote. It was a former presidential candidate used as part of his campaign. So I'm just going to put that out there and see if anybody remembers who said this as part of their campaign. Nobody? Bill Clinton. He ran on the idea that he had empathy for people experiencing hardships. So that was kind of his shtick, I guess you could say. So I wanted to kind of put up just a little tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. If any of these things, see if they reverberate with you guys. I like if you consider Red Bull to be part of a balanced diet. And a few other ones, you consider 40 hours a week to be a vacation. You find yourself hoping to get the flu just so you have a reason to stay in bed. So, wondering if your cell phone would actually float if you threw it into the river. So, case files have become light bedtime reading. Falling asleep at the dentist's office because that's a great time to put your feet up. So I kind of found some of these humorous little things online, kind of merged several top 10 lists that I came across. So, but I think it kind of highlights that this is kind of where some people can really end up in their work. And there's a kind of a story used a lot in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You're talking about stopping and sharpening your saw, that you have somebody who's sawing like mad and just getting exhausted, and somebody said, well, why don't you stop and sharpen your saw? And he's like, no, I can't, I don't have time, you know. It's like, well, you'd be much better at cutting that wood if you take the time to take care of your tools. And in our work, we are the tools. You know, if you're a caregiver, if you're a foster parent, if you're a therapist or some sort of a child welfare, you know, case manager, you know, you are, you know, the biggest tool that you have. Your personality, your connection with that person is vital to your work, and so therefore we're really obligated to take good care of ourselves. So there's a lot of terminology that you guys may have heard, and this is kind of my take on things from what I've read and put together. Vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress is also a pretty common term. Compassion fatigue has been out there for a while, and burnout. And they're often used interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same. So, so I wanted you to kind of just think about, you know, what are some words that you think of just when you hear each of those terms, and, you know, if there's a way that you would differentiate between any of those terms. So, anybody have any reactions to any of those off the top of your head?
I remember one time I saw it as more of a continuum, and the presenter talked about, unfortunately, if you get to real burnout, you're not going to get back. You really should go to a different job. That was really powerful for me.
Yeah.
Because everybody goes, oh, I'm burned out, like you can do that every day, but
Yeah.
maybe not.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, reactions? So, while I agree with you that there are extremes and there is a continuum, I would kind of probably categorize it a little bit different. Vicarious trauma really is the term that it gets designated for trauma work in my mind. And it's a process of change that happens because you care about other people who have been hurt and you feel a sense of responsibility to take care of them. And so it's a ongoing thing that can whittle away at your psychological well-being, your physical and your spiritual well-being, all those kind of really important aspects of who you are as a person. And it has to do with the fact that you're dealing with traumatized people. So secondary traumatic stress is kind of like vicarious trauma on steroids. So this is where you got to the point where your clients are. You know, you're experiencing traumatic stress like they're experiencing PTSD. And so you're, you know, the symptoms kind of very much mirror what they experienced, even though you were not the person who experienced that trauma, they were, but you've heard about it and you've kind of experienced it through your empathy with them. So, and you can even get to the point where you're kind of re-experiencing the things that you remember in their story through dreams and other types of almost like flashback kinds of experiences. So, sorry, compassion fatigue is more of a general stress related to helping, caregiving, and it's kind of an exhaustion that can take over and really kind of impact your ability to kind of connect with yourself, feel joy, really care for others. So it's similar, but it's really around kind of a more broader sense of dealing with, sometimes dealing with traumatized people, but also it can be, you know, non-traumatized people who are just going through very stressful life circumstances. So, so in that way, it's a little bit different. Although, again, a lot of people kind of use it interchangeably with vicarious trauma, and sometimes people feel like it's less stigmatizing to say, I have compassion fatigue versus I've got very vicarious trauma. And then burnout is really kind of like you said, that exhaustion, disconnection, your job satisfaction is really low, motivation is kind of out the window, and you're dealing with a lot of workplace stress and a lot of complex, difficult cases. But it's not necessarily specific to trauma. So you can walk into the post office and you could see people in the post office burned out, you know, versus you know, someone who's a caregiver for, you know, vulnerable populations. So I put this in here because I know trauma can feel like this when you look at it at first glance as this overwhelming mountain to climb, and how do you possibly get to the other side? But in reality, this quote I think really speaks to it much better, that it's those grains of sand in your shoe, that if you don't get out of your shoe, they're gonna wear you down, and they're gonna just be there to nag and annoy you and so forth. A lot of times people, when you're experiencing vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, it's not so much that one big trauma that you can't seem to shake out of your mind, it's all the thousands that have stacked up over time. And you may not even remember all of them, but they are kind of within you, wearing you out. And that's because of how trauma impacts the body. So, and more, the research has kind of pointed all the different ways that people who have been traumatized, their bodies are actually physically altered by those experiences. And so I started to think about this whole concept of vicarious trauma, and that we're, through our empathy and all this stuff, experiencing kind of what they're experiencing. I'm like, am I giving myself brain damage by the work I do? Am I, really putting myself that much at risk by, listening to stories every day of what people have gone through? And it really is through this process of what they call mirror neurons through our brain that we experience empathy. We kind of take on, those kind of positions and movements of others, kind of the whole process that, when you see someone yawn, you automatically start yawning. Those are your little mirror neurons in your brain, and the same process happens through empathy. And when you have high empathy, which is a good thing in many caregiving roles, it makes you vulnerable to experiencing this issue. So these are things to be on the lookout for: difficulties managing emotions, kind of a loss of safety, trust, blaming others, sense of persecution, excessive sarcasm and cynicism. So I've seen this a lot. One of the programs that I was involved with in Racine County was the Child Advocacy Center. And folks working in law enforcement have some of the most sickest, twisted humor that you can kind of find, but it's a protective mechanism for them in some ways. But kind of when it goes across that line over into really being super, super cynical, it can be very problematic. And so just kind of feeling that sense of detachment, minimizing, and sensitivity. I've seen this on one of my teams. I had an intake coordinator who had worked a lot within child welfare, and she came to me really frustrated that one of the therapists said she couldn't take any more trauma cases for the time being. She kind of was trying to set a limit for herself and a boundary. And the intake coordinator was like, how could she just do that? She was kind of just like offended that this other person could set this boundary. And I'm like, whoa, this is a good thing for her to be able to do that. If it becomes, a long-term problematic thing where she's refusing certain types of clients, then that's a different issue. But if she's just setting a temporary boundary, right now I have, my plate is full, that's okay. So, a lot of avoidance. There's a term that I've read that I thought was really appropriate, especially in therapy experiences, is this kind of what they call silencing kind of effect, where you kind of like, you're not feeling suicidal, are you? Right? You're not. You kind of don't even give people a chance to respond, and that's kind of something that happens pretty frequently. So a lot of addiction, dissociation, hopelessness, helplessness, hypervigilance, physical complaints. So if you're somebody who works in HR at an organization like ours, you get a lot of that. A lot of sick days, a lot of things like that. Sometimes poor decision making, people really making a lot more mistakes than they normally would. And just overall disconnection. So why would this happen? Well, usually it happens because you're good at what you do, right? You're there for your clients, you show up, you care for them, you are taking care of other people, and you're good at it. And you care, and you're busy. Busy, busy, busy. You're doing more with less seems to be the theme of the day, right? And then, of course, we're working with the most vulnerable members of our society. So for my team, that's children. You mentioned you work with the aging population. We're talking about a lot of people who really are stuck in their life circumstances and can easily be injured by people in a variety of contexts. So certain things that, again, you see at work, not only do they have tardiness, absenteeism, but there's this term I came across from somebody else that said presenteeism. And those are the people who are there physically, but they are not there doing the work. They are just there taking up space. And they tend to fight a lot with their peers, not get along real well with other people. They can be toxic. And avoid certain types of cases or clients or families, and make a lot of errors. So of course, as if you're an employer, you really want to kind of rein those situations in. So, and there's a lot of different kind of internal processes and reasons why people have a hard time kind of acknowledging that this is where they're headed, even if they're not all the way there yet. So some of the questions that I like to kind of anticipate is, why doesn't everyone get burned out or have secondary trauma? Why would two people sitting next to each other, one gets burned out and the other one doesn't? Why would that be? And then, of course, in the interest of prevention and keeping people in their careers long term, how can we keep this from happening to ourselves, to our colleagues, to the people that we supervise? And so one of the things I kind of think about, and I'll pass these around, is to think about yourself as a rubber band. You kind of just take a few and pass them around. Sorry, I just spilled some on the floor. Not only do I like to play with little things, I like to have little takeaways for you to remember. And if you look at the kind of color-coded handout, there's a resiliency quiz on the very first page. And resiliency has really kind of come out as being kind of the antidote for burnout, for vicarious trauma, is to be resilient. So like a rubber band, you want to be flexible. You want to be able to kind of react. And while you want to be able to hold your form while you're under stress, the idea is that you get back to a relaxed state and you can be pretty loosey-goosey when you're not under stress, so that you can kind of have that give and take. And so the resiliency quiz, if you kind of take a look at it, it really kind of, I don't expect you to kind of take it as a quiz, but just to use it as a guide. So I'm thinking about, some of the items there, like, are those things that you could do more of, or maybe you're already doing really well with, and that's fabulous, and how do you maintain that? And so it kind of breaks down to the different types of things, and really having a balance across the board with that is one way to kind of really try to maintain a sense of resiliency in your person as well as in your work. So there's three kind of things that are commonly tied in with resiliency and kind of doing some prevention work. And that is to kind of know your ABCs. So the first thing is you want to be aware of what's even going on. Where are you at with that? Are you more on the burned out side, or are you more resilient in your functioning right now? And then balance, kind of as I alluded to, finding the multiple sectors and having things from each of those things, finding balance, as well as having balance within your work, life kind of stuff, and balance just within your job. So, and then having connection with others is really super important, and particularly because trauma can have a really significant impact on people's spiritual well-being, that connection is often a way to really renew that. And it's very important, regardless of what your faith beliefs are, having that spirituality is really important. So, and I know a lot of times people talk about resilience within our clients, resilience within children in particular. But resiliency is really something that can be lifelong. So there's things that you can do throughout the course of your life to really kind of have an impact on it. And even though I use this from the Center of Developing Child from Harvard University, it could be something that applies to anyone of any age. So you can see they have a little, whoops, I just did something. You have the teeter-totter here, and where you put your fulcrum helps to kind of determine whether, not good with this, whether the negative outcomes have more weight or the positive outcomes have more weight. So our goal is to build resilience so that balance thing tips more on the positive side, both by having positive outcomes, but also by just kind of where you put that teeter-totter fulcrum. So for awareness, if you look at the blue sheets in the handouts, there's several. I put up 4 different kind of tools. I'm not expecting anybody to take these now, but when you get a chance at some point, you can take 1 or 2 or all 4 of them if you like. The first one, the Professional Quality of Life tool, is probably the most widely used and broadly based sort of questionnaire that you can use to kind of assess where you're at. And one of the nice things about it is that if you look at the scoring, it not only looks at burnout, which is the general stuff, the secondary traumatic stress, it also looks at compassion and satisfaction. So it gives you kind of a positive frame to include in there. But then there are some other ones that are shorter and focus more specifically on resiliency, self-care, traumatic stress, and things along those lines. So I don't really have a strong, preference for any one of them, but I would kind of just recommend using one and seeing where you come out, and then you can give it, take it on an ongoing basis. These were all things that I found online. They're free. They come with scoring instructions, and they're pretty, quick and easy. So balance. Another image on one of the green sheets is the self-care wheel. And again, it shows, a variety of different things that you can do for yourself to take care of yourself. But there, you want to kind of scatter them out throughout those 6 different pieces so that it's not all weighted towards physical. If you're somebody who eats healthy, exercise and all that stuff, that's great. But you should also, find ways to take care of yourself emotionally and personally in relationships and doing the different things at your work as well, so that it's balanced. And I think one of the big things that I've run across so often is the second item there, which is vacations. And people just, oftentimes I don't have time to take vacation. I don't want to take a vacation because I know when I get back, I'm going to have 1,000 emails, I'm going to have 1,000 voicemails, and it'll be worse than if I never even took a vacation. And so people have been more and more inclined not to take a vacation, which can really be dangerous. And then other things that are a good way to bring in some balance is to vary your workload, if you can. Some jobs have more flexibility with that than others. Sometimes finding a buddy who can trade cases with you if you find certain issues kind of being especially challenging for you. And then doing professional development and trainings, getting out of the office, really kind of finding ways to keep yourself focused on, new techniques, new trends in the field, keeping yourself kind of engaged in that learning process so that it just doesn't feel like I'm doing the same thing every day over and over again with no real positive change in sight. And to kind of speak to the connections, I really like this quote from Chief Seattle, and that it really kind of describes the web of life, and that all things are bound together, all things connect. So if we do any damage to the web, we are doing damages to ourselves. And so it really speaks to how interconnected everything in our world is. And there's an activity. Let me see how we're doing on time. Pretty good. that is definitely worthwhile doing. So on the back of the self-care wheel is what's called the 6 circles activity. So it kind of, each circle represents different things, and your goal is to kind of write the names of either 3 people or 3 experiences that you've had. So ranging from who are supportive colleagues in your immediate work environment, who are supportive colleagues who are, you know, maybe not necessarily work directly with you, but you can kind of reach out to for support. Friends that you don't talk shop with, because everybody needs that, right? You need to have a friend who's outside of the world that you're in, who, if you started talking shop with, they would be like, what? You know, come on, let's just be real here. You know, we don't have to talk about work all the time. Having a mentor, somebody who kind of would be there to provide guidance and support, either as a supervisor or kind of somebody outside of your direct line of command. And then what are activities that you do just for you? Just for you. And if you're a parent, that gets really hard because a lot of people find ways to caregive in every aspect of who they are. And then there, you know, also, what are your experiences of beauty and joy? You know, when was the last time you saw just, you know, gorgeous sunset and just sat there and kind of watched it for a while, you know, or listened to the sound of a babbling creek or whatever, just so that you can kind of connect to that sense of beauty, or gone to an art gallery or something along those lines. So these are a lot of different questions to kind of really ask yourself about how are you connecting, which connections are important to you, what keeps you centered, what gives you strength, and kind of some ways to kind of hone in, because not all of our connections are positive. Sometimes we have people who, you know, as much as they are meant to be friends or supportive loved ones, they aren't. And sometimes that can bring in extra toxicity into your personal life as well as what you're experiencing through your work. So kind of doing some reflections on that can be helpful as well. And there's another activity I included in here. Again, because we don't have a ton of time, I wouldn't, you know, take time for you to do it today, but you can kind of use that circle to kind of cut down which percentage of time you spend with clients, coworkers, friends, you know, a church or other kind of social group, family, and any other kind of important relationships in your life. And sometimes those results can surprise you when you talk about time. So what now? How do you start doing self-care? You know, we don't have any time. How do you do this? It's just gonna be a lot of work. By the way, I'm already exhausted. I'm already overwhelmed. I can't fit in one more thing. And that is the catch-22 of this. We are least motivated to do it when we need it the most. So what I wanted to kind of provide today was just, you know, some perspective with, you know, the Buddha and the nice quote there that just like everybody else, you deserve love and affection. This is equal to anybody else in the universe. And there are little things, and the little things are important because I recently kind of got exposed to this concept, and it really kind of fits so, I think, well within this framework, and that it came out, kind of became very popular around the Tour de France, and that there were these bicyclists who were like, okay, we're going to tweak these tiny little things, and maybe over time, if we tweak enough things, we'll be able to win the Tour de France. And they did that in this, it was the British team, and they won within like 3 years, so even quicker than they anticipated. So you can either see where if you do a 1% improvement over time, things will start to get significantly better, or if things go 1% worse over time, they start to really tank. So, you know, there's a decision that can be made there, a choice about behavior, and it doesn't have to be an overnight big change. You know, I'm going to overhaul my life and, you know, quit my job, move to, you know, wherever, and become this different person. I just have to tweak these things. So there's a handout, you know, 50 little examples of ways to take a break. But I also wanted to kind of give you a few other things that we can do really right here and now. And this one, you know, kind of calls on, the top one is an ear rubbing thing, which seems a little corny to me at first. I was like, that's not gonna work. But if you actually rub your ears, you know, and your earlobes and massage all the way around them for several minutes, you will find that, you know, as they warm up, they actually kind of trigger energy points in your ears, and you start to feel more alert, more kind of energetic, and feel, as well as feeling calmer. And I actually did that in a team meeting, and people were like, wow, that kind of worked. I'm kind of amazed. Okay, and that was pretty quick. Another activity that can be very helpful is that, again, sometimes people don't really connect to the physical stuff, and that just having a soothing sense of touch is important. And so, you know, in a lot of our work, thank you, we focus on how we can't necessarily touch our clients or whatever, or they can't touch us, you know, all that stuff. But if you can find a way to kind of even just put your hand over your heart or something like that for several minutes, and just experiencing that sense of touch, even if you're touching, you know, yourself in that kind of way, it can have a very positive impact on you.
So that should say soothing and not
Oh, yep, so not southing, soothing, sorry. Little typo. Another thing that I've done, again, is to bring in the senses. One of my friends, her husband works at Steinhoffel's, and they have these little packets of lavender, and she kind of handed out to a group of our friends. I was like, oh, I'm gonna take this to work. So after I've gotten off a stressful phone call, responded to an email I didn't really want to deal with, you know, I'm like, okay, let me take a whiff, take a breath. And, you know, it's a great way to kind of relax. Likewise, there's these little meditations. Again, I can hand these out for folks. This one is a pretty commonly used one. It's the loving kindness meditation. So it's really kind of about how to kind of really think about yourself as being safe and having positive well-being and happy and internally and externally and all that stuff. So other things on the list, you know, you can do imagery exercises. You know, I think a real interesting one that I've seen is to imagine in your mind a very tightly wound rope, and then imagine that rope slowly starts to unwind. And I included a few of those in the packet as well that you can kind of utilize. So. And then those are kind of like, again, some very things that I would include in that kind of 1% change, that if you can find a way, you know, to do these really brief, quick things that take a minute or two at the most, you know, and start to build on that as a little ritual that you do on a regular basis. It doesn't necessarily have to be every day, but on an ongoing basis. And hopefully over time, what you'll see is those things start to have that positive impact and start to kind of build you up to be more resilient. So, but if those things don't work, there are other things to do. You know, there's a provider resilience app that I just came across, free app that I just found on the App Store, and you can actually take the ProQual test within that, as well as, and it asks for like days since your last vacation, all that kind of stuff. And then of course, you know, as we talked about, if you're really burned out and you can't get yourself back on track, you've had too much trauma exposure, you know, you do have a choice. You know, we live in the United States. No one is demanding that you do this career. You know, you have the ability to make a change if you need to take care of yourself. So all those things are part of that. And then I'm going to kind of skip through this section, but feel free to review it. I wanted to kind of make sure I leave a lot of time for questions and so forth. See if people have comments or things that kind of spoke to them, as I kind of went through that pretty quickly. Would you guys say that you experience a lot of vicarious trauma in the folks that you work with? I see a few people shaking heads. So.
Define a lot.
What's that?
Define a lot.
Is it something that you think you hear about on a pretty much a daily basis? Yeah?
Well, I always say most of our jobs, and probably just better than your room, people aren't coming to us because things are going well with them. That isn't why they're there. So.
Yep. And when people especially have a lot of complex trauma and poly-victimization, of a variety of different types of traumas, those people are really hard to see improvements with, because those are such challenging individuals to see change. Those things have been kind of ingrained in who they are in many cases, and that could be, very overwhelming too. It's like, okay, how can I even chip away at this? Because this has been their life for the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's part of why I wanted to work with kids, because it was easier to see them start to change, because they hadn't experienced as much. Other thoughts, reactions, questions? So, do people feel like this gave them some ideas of different ways, different things to use, to try out? Yep.
I appreciate the information that you presented. I'd like to take it back to a couple of my colleagues. We're actually involved in the Wisconsin initiative to be trauma-focused CBT.
Oh, great. Mm-hmm. With Jennifer Walgocki?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great training.
And right now I have 5 cases, trauma cases, and it's pretty significant. And this, again, is something that's very helpful that I can take back to my colleagues, so that we can make sure that we're providing the care that we want to for ourselves and for our consumers.
Yep, definitely. So, and that's the thing, is that some of these cases, come to you with such, impactful stories. And then we've had a couple, it's like, okay, I feel like I can deal with this now, and then, it continues and it continues and it continues, like those little grains of sand in your shoe. Every story, kind of can stick with you. Pretty soon you're carrying around, the weight of the world. So, and you didn't even kind of realize that that was happening. So, but anybody planning to take a vacation soon? It is summer. All right, well, that's good. So I know I have one coming up in 11 and a half days, so I'm counting down. I'm going to be out of the office for 7 days straight. That's a big step. So all that stuff is good. And this is something as a supervisor, I find that I have to do, because, even though you're in that leadership role and you're not directly working with clients, you're hearing the worst cases come from all your different staff. And, when you have, like myself, 7 therapists that are coming to you with stories, 11 therapists, and they each have 40 to 50 cases each, and you're hearing the worst of those, it adds up fast. And so I sometimes have to check myself that, okay, I got to spread out my supervision. I can't have everybody come the same day, because it just, feels like I'm on this conveyor belt of pain, so. And that's why it is good to kind of vary your cases if you can, so that you don't have all TFCBT cases or, the same issue over and over again. So, well, I appreciate everybody's time and that you came here over the lunch hour. So if you have any questions, they have my contact information. Feel free to shoot me an email. I think the PowerPoint presentation also is going to be online with the little webinar stuff. So I appreciate that you guys were open to this today. So enjoy.